Pika pika!
In harsh geothermal conditions, life still finds a way to function resiliently. Electric's green fur acts as a permanent biological generator of static energy. Communication via electric pulses helps them coordinate perfectly in this dead land. Accidental static electricity awakens the beast sleeping deep beneath the earth. An ancient force awakens, threatening to incinerate all tiny living beings now. The dry mud becomes an extremely effective natural insulating armor for defense. Facing extinction, a mechanism of cellular transformation begins to activate now. Manectric emerges, its golden mane brilliantly challenging the intense volcanic heat. Lightning speed is the only weapon to counter the force of gravity. Despite its strength, biological limits are insufficient to overwhelm raw nature. Mega evolution is the pinnacle of releasing unlimited internal potential energy. The electrostatic field turns the ground into a lethal zone of power. The piercing current breaks all laws of physical defensive structures today. An explosive shockwave to re-establish the inherent order of nature itself. Order is established when the hunter becomes the ultimate dominant ruler. Collective survival is the core of all wild Pokémon species' existence. The eyes of a king who found truth in the deepest adversity. The great journey ends to open a new ecological era of life. The boundary between vegetation and water is always a cradle of life. In these damp hills, a miraculous biological cycle is about to begin. Unlike ordinary reptiles, Turtwig does not seek food the moment it hatches. It relies on a primordial survival mechanism, direct photosynthesis. Its shell is neither horn nor bone. It is a biological alluvial structure, maintaining its integrity only when fully hydrated. To supplement minerals, they harvest flora in their own unique way, then directly extract the sap through osmotic capillaries. But the night strips away their solar energy, turning them into perfect targets for cold-blooded predators. Kricketune has no concept of mercy for fledgling prey. However, the alluvial shell provides an excellent sliding friction coefficient to deflect the attack. Surviving predation is only the first trial. Extreme climate is the most ruthless filter of natural selection. Without water, the soil structure on its shell begins to fracture. Survival signs plummet to critical levels. But nature always rewards the patient. The early summer rains pour down. Water triggers a mutant biochemical reaction. Cell membranes expand, weight skyrockets. The second evolutionary stage, Grottle. It is no longer just a consumer, but has become a symbiotic host. These bushes perform dual photosynthesis, turning Grottles back into an automated microbial oasis. Benefits attract guests. Small creatures seek shelter in exchange for clearing parasites from the host. But a micro-ecosystem also attracts the attention of the hungry from the sky. It does not hesitate to use force to protect its symbiotic members. Years pass. When drought exceeds the tolerance threshold of local flora, a forced great migration begins. The mass of soil and vegetation carried is crushing its skeletal system. This overload forces a final biological mutation. Tor Terra, a biological tank, a complete mobile ecosystem. Its existence no longer depends on a territory because it is a territory itself. This mobile territory is rarely aggressive but will show no mercy to any senseless destruction. By manipulating seismic waves, it issues an ultimate physical warning. Stupidity sometimes overpowers the survival instinct. This biological resistance completely nullifies the enemy's momentum without the need to pursue. From a fragile mudshell, it has risen into a giant carrying life itself upon its back. Every step is a sowing of seeds. The journey of this walking continent is the clearest proof of nature's eternity. In a harsh ecosystem, existence does not depend on luck. It is the result of an optimized tripartite symbiotic model. 3 primate individuals divide their biological roles clearly to maintain the stability of the food chain. Raw resources are transported to the processing plane via a controlled freefall sequence. The next step of the process is surface cleaning using fluid pressure. Immediately after, the fire-type individual takes over, acting as a heat-generating biological combustion chamber. This sequential hydrolysis and thermal radiation process ensures absolute biosecurity for the group. But when an extreme drought disrupts the hydrological cycle, this system faces the risk of collapse. Extracting resources at this altitude requires a physical mechanism with extremely high risk. The interference of high-altitude aerodynamics has exceeded the material load-bearing limit of the branch. To counteract gravitational acceleration, the grass-type's body triggers a forced biological mutation. Evolving into Discharge provides sufficient surface tension and mechanical tensile strength to control the falling trajectory. Environmental desertification always brings extremely harsh temperature fluctuations. With insulation compromised, the system relies entirely on the endothermic regulation mechanism of the fire-type individual. The mass of cold air exceeds thermal output. Maintaining combustion threatens to deplete intracellular oxygen. Evolving into Discharge amplifies the internal reactor, creating a complete thermodynamic heat shield. The next morning, the collapse of the water cycle reaches an absolute level. All surface liquids have evaporated. Using micro-moisture sensing mechanisms, they perform exploratory drilling into the final underground water pocket. Hydrodynamic pressure must be continuously maintained to shatter the structure of the bedrock. Draining the intracellular reservoir pushes the water-type individual into acute dehydration. The biological mutation into Singapore resets hydrostatic pressure, allowing it to pierce the confined aquifer. The fluid's flow path is unclogged, reactivating the water-absorbing capillaries of the flora. Once material resources recover, their fundamental law of survival continues to operate. Alterations in physiological structure do not mutate the resource allocation function within this interconnected network. On cliffs that absorb the harshest solar radiation, life demands a specialized metabolic system. The existence of fire-type primates depends on a biological gas release valve located at the tip of the tail. This flame is not just for warmth, it is a visual gauge of the entire body's kinetic efficiency. Locomotion on vertical terrain requires an extremely optimized power-to-weight ratio. To maintain the endogenous flame, energy intake is a mandatory physical requirement. The predator's kinetic energy always triggers the prey's mechanical evasion reflex. But in the food chain, This small creature is merely a target for the aerodynamics from the sky. Calculating the trajectory incorrectly by even a few millimeters leads to biological structural destruction. By releasing a small amount of combustible material, it forces the predator to alter its aerodynamic drag. Overloading exertion in a steep environment constantly pushes the musculoskeletal system to its fracture threshold. Maximum physical pressure triggers an intracellular thermodynamic mutation reaction. Arm and leg muscles increase in density. Monferno forms, marking the transition to a more agile bipedal locomotion mechanism. The new muscle mass completely alters the hunting dynamics. It no longer relies on evasion, but uses the opponent's inertial force as leverage. But in nature, muscle size does not guarantee absolute survival against electromagnetic entities. The release of high-pressure electrical charge creates an unstoppable attack trajectory. The continuous evasion process pushes Monferno's heart rate frequency and core temperature to alarming levels. Forcing the mechanical system past physical limits repeatedly has shattered the current physiological structure. The endogenous gas supply shifts. The combustion center is forced to move from the lower coordinate origin to the top of the cerebral cortex. Infernae, the ultimate product of thermodynamic evolutionary theory. The old enemy returns, but the target's physical constants have now completely changed. Its neural reflex speed now far exceeds the opponent's aerodynamic velocity. Muscle compression generates a peerless vector thrust, directly stripping the aerial predator of its altitude advantage. From a tiny ignition point, it forged its physical structure to become the most perfect survival machine. Beneath the quiet surface of the desert, a complex underground traffic system is constantly expanding. The architect of this network is a biomechanical drilling machine. By converting muscle energy into torque, it crushes obstructive matter at speeds up to 48 kilometers per hour. The underground environment completely nullifies the extreme temperature fluctuations of the surface above. But absolute darkness forces the creature to rely on seismic waves for prey location. By measuring vibrations, it calculates an approach trajectory that optimizes momentum. The hunt ends in a quarter of a second through precise physical shearing force. But even the most perfect drilling machine has weaknesses when stripped of its geological cover. The aerial predator's fluid dynamics exceed its surface reflex capabilities. Establishing a light-blocking particulate smokescreen is the only defense mechanism. Expanding the excavation amplitude forces the musculoskeletal system to abrade against geological materials with a higher Mohs hardness. Extreme friction triggers the biomineralization process in the keratinized tissues. The biological drivetrain is facing its material load-bearing limit. To pierce the bedrock layer, an upgrade from biological material to steel alloy is mandatory. Axidrill forms. The single-axis rotor has been upgraded to a multi-blade drill bit assembly. Radial shearing force increases exponentially. Solid matter is now treated as a fluid. The increase in mechanical mass completely alters the hunting algorithm. It no longer needs to evade resistance. Resistance will be crushed. But even the greatest steel assembly must submit to the oversight of the surface ecosystem. The disparity in free-fall kinetic energy provides absolute advantage to the predator. The biological alloy shell provides a coefficient of elasticity sufficient to repel the attack trajectory. When the physical risk exceeds the caloric value gained, the hunter automatically aborts the cycle. The most perfect machine is not one that fights senselessly. It is a machine born to reshape the geological architecture of this planet. Deep within the barren mountains, A massive parabolic geographical structure acts as a natural amplifier. Here, even the slightest noise becomes deadly vibrations. To survive, Whismer must isolate its fragile eardrums using biological earplugs. Any sound emitted from that tiny mouth could cause it to suffer auditory shock, but when the sand-dwelling predator silently approaches, silence is no longer a protective shield. Compressing its energy, the timid creature unleashes a low-frequency shockwave. The sound bouncing off the narrow walls creates localized resonance, paralyzing the opponent's nervous system. Individuals surviving thousands of pressure cycles will begin to evolve their larynx. The amplifier machine Loudred is born, ready to challenge the environment. Now they use volume as a direct confrontational weapon. A compressed air mass is expelled, creating immense kinetic pressure. Even massive weight is pushed back by the invisible physical wall. To decide the alpha, they must pass a structural durability test. The body must endure extreme resonant frequencies without tearing apart. The loser must surrender the epicenter of the ecosystem. And from that epicenter, a perfect pressure machine is born. Exploud, the master of oscillation, controlling the entire core area. Every breath it takes is a physical intervention in the surrounding space. Any disturbance is locked on immediately by the biological radar system. The sonic explosion creates a localized vacuum, tearing apart the flock's flight trajectory. But dominance is always challenged by the most dangerous foreign forces. Fire and heat threaten to incinerate all vegetation at the bottom of the valley. In quantum physics, dense sound waves can strip oxygen and extinguish flames. The enemy changes tactics, using seismic waves to attack from beneath the ground. The sound machine retaliates by generating an anti-phase frequency. The interference completely nullifies the kinetic energy, returning the ground to a static state. Now is the time to deliver the final warning. The pressure explosion tears through the heat wave, repelling the outsider with pure kinetic energy. The valley is once again set into acoustic belts in perfect order. Here, life and death are determined by the size of the larynx. Where the ionosphere is thinnest, the boundary between the atmosphere and deep space fades away. Occasionally, these rifts leak a primitive life form, a living nebula. Having almost no physical mass, Cosmog sustains its existence by photosynthesizing cosmic radiation. However, this pure energy source makes for an ideal predatory target. When threatened, it reacts with an unstable quantum leap. Tearing through space consumes too much energy, pushing the seedling into a state of depletion. To preserve its core, the gas cloud undergoes a sudden gravitational collapse. It is now a miniature neutron star, so dense and heavy that it cannot move itself. This hibernation state defends itself not with a shell, but with a spatial magnetic field. Any physical impact is bent by a gravitational lens and completely repelled. Once the nucleus accumulates enough radiation over time, a cosmic fission occurs. If the flashpoint occurs under maximal daylight, it becomes an exploding stellar body, the dominator of the spectrum. All conflicts with a stellar body are resolved through direct destructive force. Its interplanetary metallic structure makes it an unbreakable penetrating cone. A plasma burst from the core will incinerate any will to resist. In this evolutionary branch, light is the symbol of absolute conquest. However, if the shell breaches beneath the silent void, the collapse will spawn a biological black hole. Radiating no light, generating no heat, it sustains life by absorbing all surrounding light quanta. Every hunt unfolds within the absolute silence of the cosmic vacuum. With a single cold decay beam, the nocturnal predator is completely stripped of its equilibrium. In the arid wilderness, there exists an entity of pure physical power. This is Rhyhorn, a creature with bone structure 1,000 times harder than humans. It often forgets its purpose while executing a lethal death charge. This absent-mindedness sometimes pushes it into grim survival traps. With short legs, Rhyhorn cannot maneuver within these narrow spaces. Compression pressure from the fall triggers a cellular restructuring process. In the moment near death, the survival instinct awakens fiercely. Raiden emerges, a standing warrior with an exaltation of intellect. It no longer runs aimlessly. Every movement is now calculated. However, Mother Nature always has even harsher environmental challenges. Raiden is buried under tons of molten matter from the core. Between life and death, it absorbs rare minerals to strengthen its shell. A heat-resistant armor begins to form, covering all remaining vulnerabilities. Rhyperia is reborn from the 1,000-ton pressure of ancient strata. With arms like cannons, it easily obliterates every physical obstacle. This power is now used to protect the ecosystem's natural balance. It stands at the pinnacle of the ultimate ground-type evolutionary chain. From a distracted creature, it has become the mountain deity. Evolution is not just changing form, it is the growth of will. The mystery of the Spikes Pokémon continues beneath Mother Earth. Deep underground, a biological network silently preserves the absolute order. These are tiny spy cells, the fundamental units monitoring the planet. When imbalance reaches a threshold, the defense mechanism will be activated. An infrasonic signal forces the fragments to abandon their dormancy. The 10% form is designed for missions requiring extreme speed. It assesses the biological threat level within a fleeting split second. Countering with extreme speed, compressing all kinetic energy into a ram. This scout form lacks the mass to suppress the giant. When speed fails, the biological structure is forced to upgrade immediately. The 50% form emerges, the ultimate embodiment of geological power. it begins executing punishment through the wrath of the land. Futile resistance only inflicts more grievous harm on the ecosystem. Chaos is a system error that must be absolutely wiped out. A process of absolute convergence between biological fragments begins. This is complete Zygarde, the final zenith of biological balance. A biological machine possessing power far surpassing the gods, order is established through the exercise of complete dominance. It concentrates energy for the ultimate core punishment, a precisely calculated strike protecting the surrounding life. The Punisher is also, simultaneously, the great healer. They return to an invisible state, hidden in every inch. Order has been preserved, awaiting the awakening of new chaos.